my best friend, whom I'll refer to as John for privacy, and I spent almost every day together during my time in college. It was good that we shared a room, but we weren't the smartest when we were together, not in the sense of intelligence, but rather in the sense of making a lot of poor, rash choices. Every time, we would be distracted by something foolish, like looking at abandoned homes or doing anything else. We could perform risky, frequently illegal acts, such as scaling water towers, that kind of ridiculous nonsense. Compared to our other excursions, this night's plan was arguably far less risky and outrageous. In the middle of the night, we thought it would be cool to explore the forests behind our town. We might receive an adrenaline pump or something. For comparison, our small town was encircled by woods on all sides. However, nobody goes to the forests in the rear of town, which is why we wanted to explore them, not the majority of ordinary folks. Anyhow, John and I had never been there before. Due to a significant fire that occurred decades ago, a sizable section of the town on that side was abandoned. The woods on that side were also rather deserted, because there is nothing else there. There are no trails or anything. After gathering a few flashlights, we left out there. The university was 30 minutes away from the back of town, and it took an additional 10 minutes to reach the woodland through the burned areas. We pulled out our flashlights and made our way into the trees now that the coast was clear. After only a few minutes, the town's lights had totally disappeared, and all we had to guide us through the forest was the dim moonlight and our little flashlights. To be honest, the first 20 or so minutes didn't feel very memorable. It was silent, and there wasn't much to see, just trees and more trees after the initial eerie feeling of walking into a pitch-black forest at night subsided. There are no strange indications of anything or abandoned buildings. That is, until John suddenly became aware of something in the distance. Up ahead, a light was slicing through the shadows between all the trees. Without a certain, it was a flashlight rather than a flickering campfire or anything organic. It was also oddly low, like if it were on the ground. As we got closer, we realized that's just what it was. There was no one around, only a flashlight sitting on the ground. Additionally, there were no indications of a camping, given that it was a standard electric flashlight. It must have been obtained recently. It would have run out of batteries by now if it hadn't been that night. We were both unable to comprehend how someone could forget a flashlight. But since it was a light in an otherwise completely dark forest, you could drop it and not notice. This led us to the conclusion that it was probably dropped while someone was jogging. They must have been fleeing something if they didn't return to retrieve it. A shiver went through me, which ought to have been our cue to go. However, we were kind of yearning for that tiny bit of adrenaline that was seeping into our veins as we shone our lights around. But in case it wasn't what we thought it was and someone was going to return for it, we felt it would be best to just leave the light. John trailed closely behind me as I led the way more into the forest. Now, we both wanted to see what more we could discover. In a way, I'm trying to piece together the whole story behind that incredibly strange discovery. A crack appeared behind us not even 2 minutes after we had left the area where the light was. Only 20 or 30 feet behind John, there were multiple sticks cracking in quick succession, roughly 3 or 4. Both of us turned and peered, but we were unable to find anything. But that definitely made us nervous. After 5 more minutes of walking, we heard the identical noise from just behind John once more. It sounded, I swear, like someone sprinting over the forest floor. However, once more, we saw nothing. But after that second encounter, neither of us had the usual thrilling rush of adrenaline we were anticipating for. Instead, we were both really scared. This was genuine fear, as if we were actually in danger. It's absurd since, in comparison to our typical activities, we both felt that this was far less of a stunt. What were the odds of really encountering someone in the middle of the night in the woods, particularly in this particular area? Even while we weren't positive it was the same person we kept hearing. It certainly sounded like it. Before we heard it again and turned to see a shadow move out of the light and under a tree. It must have happened 5 or 6 times. We both paused and stood there peering behind us for a lot longer than we usually did, so John must have noticed it too. 10 seconds later, we noticed a figure slowly moving his head to look at us from around the tree. We both reserved it right away, sprinting to the side before turning around. The way we originated, we ran through the trees for about 5 minutes in a row before slowing down to collect our breath. After that, we made our way back to town using our flashlights in the dark. Strangely, on the way back, we both realized we had missed a flashlight. It must have been picked up and switched off by someone, possibly that guy. We couldn't believe what had happened as we made our way back to campus. Who was it? Just didn't make sense to stalk us at night in the backwoods. A few days later, the town received information of a missing individual who was last seen moving toward the back of town. However, neither of us can swear that this had anything to do with what we went through. It's impossible to know if they vanished in the woods or back there, or if something similar to what we went through happened to them. I suppose what disturbs me so much is the idea of what we may have discovered in those forests, had we allowed the odd man to go on chasing us, or if we had ventured farther into the jungle. I'm not sure what we would have discovered, or whether we would have survived. I relocated around 1,000 miles inland from the far west coast a few years ago. The drive was not on the major routes that most people take across the United States. Rather, it was across the northern portion of the country. These were far less common, and unless you're traveling to all the major cities, you probably must use a number of detours. At least the drive was picturesque. However, after going back and forth several times, its impact kind of faded. This occurred during my final drive, while the last remnants of the move were crammed into my trunk. I drove all day, arrived to a small village, and napped at around 6 o'clock in the evening. At 9 p.m., I awoke and kept traveling. However, my automobile started acting up after I had only been out of town for an hour. The entire steering system felt strange, and several maintenance lights came on. Over the following 5 minutes, it only grew worse. I knew I couldn't drive it since it was so awful. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder and off the road. It almost seemed like a dumb joke that this had to occur as far between towns as feasible. I knew there were no towns for an hour in either direction, because I had driven this route multiple times. There is no one on the road. There are forests everywhere, and there is no service either. After reclining in my seat for a short while, I stepped out of my car and took a look around. I'm not sure, but I knew nothing at all about autos. I suppose I was expecting there was a clear problem, but there wasn't. Most likely, the garbage just reached the end of its useful life. I must admit that after spending a few minutes outside, I became aware of how eerie this road was. Faint, dispersed street lights and trees that seemed to go out indefinitely. It was also completely quiet. Paradoxically, I do recall feeling though I was in a horror film. However, I realized that my only hope in this situation was to persuade someone to stop and assist, whether that meant offering a ride to the next gas station or whatever. I waited for someone to walk by while standing outside and resting on my car. I was taken aback when, 15 minutes later, a car came down the street and stopped for me. He rolled down his window as he drove up just beside me. The man, who appeared to be in his mid-30s, smoked a cigarette and examined me for a few moments before inquiring about my well-being. To be fair, it made sense to him. Must be wary of picking up a stranger by the side of the road. I told him about the state of my car. He pondered for a few more seconds. He continued to check his mirrors as he went, and perhaps it was just my intuition, but there was something really strange about this man. I wasn't particularly fussy about who helped me at this point, but every warning sign in my thoughts told me not to get in the car with him. So why don't you get involved? I'll provide a ride to the following town. Tonight, I wouldn't mind lending a hand to someone. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to turn down his offer. Actually, a friend of mine is on his way. It should only take a few minutes. I apologize. I should have said that. With a nod and an unfriendly grin, the man swiftly pulled away and disappeared down the street. All I needed to know that I had made the proper choice was that response. But that was the final vehicle to pass for at least an hour. I guess I was on that lonely road even though I didn't realize I was. It didn't help that it was the middle of the night. When headlights came down the road, I was virtually dozing off against the side of my automobile. From the direction I was going, this time, they paused and approached me when I waved to gain their attention. Strangely, the vehicle appeared to be the same one that had visited an hour ago. It could have been any other dark black vehicle, though, because I didn't give it much attention. In any case, I thought they all looked the same. In addition, a woman was behind the wheel when they rolled down their window. She appeared to be in her late 20s. It seemed odd, but she asked if I needed assistance right away. She smiled nervously, almost as if she didn't want to offer assistance. I informed all I wanted was a ride to the town, the gas station, or anywhere else. With a nod, she opened the passenger door. I accepted the offer since I wasn't going to turn down another one. The feelings were immediately strange and unsettling. Her eyes were wide as she gazed ahead at the road without saying anything. "I appreciate you coming to get me." I tried to strike up a conversation, saying, "I don't know what I'd do if you didn't." She never even inquired about my car or why I was stuck. She didn't answer either, continuing to look straight ahead at the road. There was something very odd about her, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. So I sat back and tried to get some rest while we drove silently for about 20 minutes. When I saw a sign for a gas station 2 miles ahead, I was relieved and told her that she could drop me off when we arrived. She didn't look at me. I gave her a quick nod while maintaining a straight face, but since we were getting close, I thought I would ask her if everything was all right. The woman looked at me, then back at me, and her eyes seemed almost frightened, which scared me a little. At that moment, I noticed something moving in the corner of my eye, and when I looked at the mirror, I saw that it was in the rearview mirror. So I looked back, of course, and my heart fell. The back seat was dark, and there was a figure sitting directly behind my seat, sort of hunched over like he was keeping out of view. However, as soon as I looked at him, he sat up straight, and I could just make out that it was the same guy who had stopped on the road earlier, the one I had refused to ride from, and he looked angry. I quickly looked forward and saw the gas station up ahead, telling the woman to pull in and drop me off right away. I realized that this woman was also a victim, probably being coerced by the man in the back seat to pick me up from the road and continue driving to wherever the hell he wanted to take us. I tried to persuade her to stop at the gas station, but the man yelled over me, threatening to shut up and telling her to keep driving. However, she wasn't slowing down, and she was going to pass it. She was still traveling at least 50 miles per hour when she abruptly and sharply turned in, slamming on the brakes just before hitting the gas pumps. She immediately bailed from the car, which was my cue to do the same, and we both ran for the gas station doors. Once inside, she instructed the night clerk to call the police while I watched as the man got in the front seat and drove off. Long story short, it was exactly what I thought had happened. The woman and I were both victims of that creepy guy who was probably kidnapping us. To be honest, I'm really grateful that she had the guts to pull into the gas station. Despite the man's threats, she could have easily followed his instructions and continued driving, and I have no idea what would have happened. Fortunately, I don't have to know. By J&K, I work at a small diner by the side of the road that is open around the clock. Nothing glamorous at all. The owner was a close friend of mine, and I needed something to help me get by for a little while. It was also much better than working at a typical diner, because it was never busy, at least not all at once. It was just a pull-off from the highway, where truckers or people on road trips would typically stop by to grab coffee or a quick meal before hitting the road again, making for interesting customers. However, because I worked overnight, it was usually very quiet, and this night was no different. Only 2 or 3 patrons stopped in for a quick cup of coffee before heading back to the road. After that, there was an hour of nothing, during which I just sat by the windows and stared out at the deserted highway, thinking about whatever. Eventually, I believe at 1 in the morning, a truck pulled into the parking lot. I went around the counter and greeted the two men as they entered. They both appeared exhausted from a long drive, and they placed the same order as everyone else that evening, 2 regular black coffees to go. One of them went to the bathroom after placing their order, and the other sat at the bar while I made their drinks. Hey, I got a weird question. You aren't alone here, are you? I hesitated for a moment. Second, I couldn't tell what he was trying to say, so I decided to just be honest because he didn't seem to have any other intention. Yeah, just me for tonight. It's been slow, so I don't mind it. He appeared almost perplexed for a moment, as if he wasn't expecting that response or was perhaps hoping that wasn't my response. Well, just be careful. As we drove in, I noticed a guy at the side of the building. He appeared to be up to no good, but I don't know. I thought he might work here, which is why I asked. I thanked him for informing me, and by that time the other guy had emerged from the restroom. I gave them both their coffees, and they drove back onto the highway. After they were gone, I went back up to the window and looked out at both sides of the parking area, but it was completely empty, and I had been watching outside all night. The guy didn't seem to be lying, but after a minute, my curiosity got the better of me, and I went outside to look around the building. I didn't see anyone, so I walked around the entire area. There was nothing, but it did feel a little unsettling because of the dark woods surrounding the building. I would have seen if someone else had entered the parking lot, and we only had parking in the front, so their car would be out there. I didn't try my luck, so I went back inside. The truck driver must have thought he saw something that wasn't there because he was obviously tired and didn't mean any harm, but I kept my eyes open after that. The diner remained empty, and there weren't many diners or passing cars on the highway, so it was a very slow night. I did some dishes and I swept the floor, took a break, and went to the bathroom for a minute. I was using my phone, so I was definitely taking my time, but at some point while I was in there, I heard a door open. I quickly finished up and headed back to the floor. "Welcome in," I said in my usual enthusiastic customer service voice as I walked out to the diner, but I stopped dead in my tracks when I looked up. No one was present at any of the seats. I cautiously circled the floor after a moment, but no one was inside. I was positive that I had heard the door open. It was, of course, a sound I knew very well. I approached it, pushed it open, and took a look outside. No automobiles. I gave the door a few tests, and it was unquestionably sturdy. It wouldn't fly open by itself. Additionally, it wasn't even breezy outside. My stomach constricted. The truck driver's comment that someone was sneaking about the building kept coming to mind. Perhaps someone was there after all. I made the hasty decision to complete the dishes in an attempt to distract myself from becoming overly suspicious. I reasoned that I was probably only frightening myself. I remained behind the counter and cleaned every dish that had been left over from previous shifts. Suddenly, I heard something different over the clanking of all the dishes. Something seemed to be moving. I hurriedly shut off the water and set the plates I was wiping down. Once more, I heard it. A man came around the corner before I could turn the corner to see what it was. He left the rear room. This man had medium untidy hair and a greyish beard, and he appeared to be 40 years old. He was dressed in a navy blue unkempt hoodie. I just stood there in shock, not sure how or what he was doing back there, as he grinned and took a seat at the bar. The man abruptly broke the stillness by saying, "I'll have a coffee, please." Of course, I wanted to ask, but I was scared what answer I might get. I hesitantly began brewing it after nodding. As I turned my back on him, I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my head. Counter. All I could hope was that, if I gave him what he wanted, he would depart. He grinned as I gave him his drink. "You're alone here." "Huh. It must get lonely. It doesn't appear like many people visit this area at this late hour." "I suppose occasionally, but it's not too horrible." I detested this guy's presence, but he persisted in talking. "How long do they force you to labor overnight? For what?" 3:40 a.m. I didn't want to give him any clue of my schedule, so I told him that my shifts frequently fluctuate. At last, he got to his feet, thanked me, and left with another eerie smile. I watched him go up to the road until I could no longer see him, never getting into a car. My heart continued to pound. There was something unsettling about him, uncomfortable manner. For the next 15 minutes, my eyes were fixed on the windows. I suppose the whole event was so unnerving since I didn't know anything about what was happening. Was this the man the truck driver was referring to? Or was it someone else? If it was, he would have spent the last few hours in the building, which would be even more unsettling. I was genuinely reluctant to return. I was quite uncomfortable whenever I put my back to the doors, whether I was doing the dishes or anything else. However, I was still gazing at the deserted roadway when I heard the identical noise I had heard earlier in the lavatory. A door opens. However, I knew it wasn't the entrance door because I was in the main room. It was the side access door, similar to the one used to reach the dumpster. I rushed past the counter and peered into the corridor. Back then, it was dark there, but it seemed as though someone had just passed through one of the closet doors. As soon as possible, I bolted outside, jumped into my car, and headed for the highway while phoning the police. Surprisingly, the man was still there, hiding in the closet, when the police arrived. The same person who entered and gave me the creeps. However, that was by no means the most unsettling thing they discovered. The man was carrying a rope, and after a little more exploring, they discovered behind the diner was a half-excavated hideaway in the forest. It was essentially a collection of equipment for doing, to put it mildly, terrible things. I suppose he was watching the diner and finally came in to make sure I was alone myself before returning to the woods to retrieve his belongings, so he could swiftly seize me and pull me into the woods where the remainder of his equipment was. Fortunately, he has been imprisoned for a considerable amount of time.